My daughter is seriously injured and in critical condition.
I suddenly received a call from my son. While I was on a trip abroad, I learned of my granddaughter's dire situation and immediately returned to the United States. However, it was too late. I didn't make it in time. My 5-year-old granddaughter had passed away and was placed in a small urn. A year later, when I went to visit the grave, I saw a small child praying.
Oh, Grandma.
To my astonishment, it was my granddaughter who was supposed to have died. She spotted me and joyfully ran towards me. I hugged her tightly, hardly believing my eyes. Then, I learned the terrifying truth that had been kept from me all along, and I was consumed with a burning desire for revenge. My name is Nancy, and I'm 63 years old. My husband has already passed away, and I live alone. My 40-year-old son and his wife have a 4-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. They live 3 hours away by car. My son, John, and his wife, Amy, would bring the grandchildren to visit me a few times a year. These visits were precious and joyful times for me, but there was something that slightly concerned me. It was about my granddaughter, Emma. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was being treated differently compared to her younger brother, Harrison. This thought first struck me one day when my son and his wife were staying overnight at my place. They mentioned they were going to buy some toys and took Harrison with them, leaving Emma behind. After they left, Emma looked up at me with her sweet eyes and said,
Grandma, I'm hungry.
"Oh, I'm sorry I didn't notice. I'll make something for you right away," I replied. I took out a pan and made pancakes, which she had said she loved before. When I served the pancakes with butter and syrup, Emma beamed with delight.
Wow! It smells so good,
she exclaimed. "Be careful not to burn yourself," I said.
Okay. Thank you, Grandma,
she replied. I cut the pancakes into bite-sized pieces for her, and watching her eat with shining eyes, cheeks full, filled me with a deep sense of warmth.
These are so fluffy and really delicious,
Emma said as she happily gulped down her milk. Just then, I heard the front door open, followed by loud footsteps.
Emma! Why are you eating by yourself? Give that to Harrison,
my son shouted. I'm about to make some for him, so please don't say that, I said as I started to head back to the kitchen. But before I could do anything, my son abruptly snatched the pancake from Emma and fed it to his brother. Watching this, Emma's face fell, and she lowered her head, looking sad. Feeling sorry for Emma, I offered to make a new batch for Harrison, but my son refused, saying it wasn't necessary. There's no need to take food away from her while she's eating, I insisted.
Emma has a small appetite. Right, Emma? You're full, aren't you?
My son asked.
Yeah,
Emma replied, though she had just started eating, so there was no way she was actually full. I tried to explain this to John, but he seemed to completely ignore me.
Don't worry about it, Nancy,
my daughter-in-law added.
Emma always acts like she's hungry but barely eats anything. It's really just a waste to give her more.
At that moment, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as I noticed my daughter-in-law, Amy, looking at Emma with a strangely cold expression, despite her being her own child. I wondered if perhaps Emma was too sad to speak up. I tried to argue with my son and daughter-in-law, insisting that they were wrong, but they wouldn't listen. Just then, I felt a tug on the hem of my apron. When I looked down, I saw Emma signaling to me with her small hand, gazing up at me with a look that seemed to say she wanted to tell me something. I'm going to get a drink. Emma, would you like to help me? I said. Emma nodded quietly, and we went to the kitchen together. Once we were alone, she whispered,
It's okay. This happens all the time. I'm the big sister, so I have to give things to Harrison.
As I set the drinks on the table, feeling uneasy, Emma eagerly helped me. My son then scolded her, saying,
Emma, stop lying about being hungry when you're not.
Amy added,
You need to act more like a big sister now that you have a little brother.
Emma's expression fell, and she apologized in a small voice,
I'm sorry.
and which broke my heart. I noticed her gently rubbing her stomach, a sign that she was probably still hungry. I realized that asking her about it in front of everyone wouldn't get the truth, so I waited until we were alone. I gently took her hand and said, If there's something on your mind, you can tell Grandma. I won't tell your parents. Emma hesitated for a moment, then quietly admitted,
I feel lonely because they only pay attention to Harrison.
I squeezed her hand tightly and softly said, You can lean on Grandma anytime. Emma smiled happily and hugged me. To think such a small child is carrying so much pain. I have to do something, I thought. Observing further, I noticed that my son and daughter-in-law rarely spoke to Emma, leaving her to play by herself, while they doted excessively on Harrison. I knew I couldn't let this continue. After the children went to bed, I sat down with my son and daughter-in-law for a serious talk. However, they were adamant in their stance. John said,
It's all in Emma's head. We're raising them without any favoritism.
He refused to budge.
Look, it's normal for things to change when a new baby comes. Emma used to be treated like a princess, but now she has to share attention. It's the same everywhere.
He argued. Amy added,
Exactly. Even though they're close in age, Emma is still the big sister. She needs to learn to be patient.
While there was some truth in what they said, the fact remained that a small child was being hurt by the situation. If you continue to make Emma feel this way, I won't forgive you. Even though we live apart, I'll be keeping an eye on things. I warned them sternly. But my son dismissed my concerns, saying,
Don't worry so much, Mom. Just go enjoy your trips with your friends. And don't forget to bring back some souvenirs.
The next day, after breakfast, they quickly packed up and left. I need to do something about this. I'm really worried, I thought to myself. Despite my concerns, I went ahead with the overseas trip I had planned with my friends. During the trip, I mentioned my worries to one of my friends, and she gave me a helpful suggestion that I planned to implement when I returned to the United States. On the third day of our trip, while having a meal abroad, I suddenly received a call from my son, John.
Emma has been in a terrible accident and is seriously injured.
He said. What? What happened? Please tell me everything. He explained that Emma had fallen from a jungle gym, hit her head hard, and was covered in blood. She was unconscious and had been rushed to the emergency room, where they told him her life was in danger. I was beside myself with worry. I quickly explained the situation to my friends and booked a flight home. Since it wasn't possible to leave that same day, I managed to get a flight for the following day, and after a 14-hour journey, I finally made it back. During the flight, I repeatedly tried to contact John, but couldn't get through. I was on edge the entire time. As soon as I landed, I called John to let him know I was heading straight to the hospital where Emma had been taken. His voice was strained as he answered.
I'm sorry I couldn't answer your calls earlier. Emma didn't make it.
He said. What? What do you mean?
She passed away right after I called you. Her injuries were so severe. We've already had the funeral and she's been cremated.
As I struggled to find words, John sent me a photo of a small urn. Emma. Emma. How could this have happened? I spent a long time sitting in the airport lobby, crying silently. When I told John that I was coming over to his house, he hesitated.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
He said, trailing off. Please, at least let me light some incense for her. I pleaded.
It all happened so suddenly, and Amy is really shaken up. Could you just give her some space?
I understood that losing her child must have been a tremendous shock for Amy, so despite my heavy heart, I had no choice but to slowly make my way back home. Once there, I placed a photo of Emma's smiling face on the altar, lit some incense, and prayed quietly. The realization that I would never see her again overwhelmed me, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. One day, I checked the mail and found that something I had ordered had arrived. Knowing I no longer had any use for it, I absent-mindedly tossed it into the bag I always carry. A while later, I called my son and found out that they had buried Emma's ashes at my late husband's grave, about 2 hours away by car. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, upset.
Mom, Amy just really doesn't want to see you.
John replied.
You remember how you accused us of favoring Harrison the last time we met? Amy hasn't been able to get over it. She's still deeply hurt.
I feel terrible for what I said to Amy. Please, let me apologize to her properly. Can you help me make peace with her? I asked.
Just leave us alone,
he said.
I don't want you prying into our lives anymore.
Our conversation was entirely one-sided. John didn't allow me to visit their home, and he even asked me not to visit the grave, saying that running into me there would be too painful for Amy. Eventually, John and Amy moved away from the place where they lost Emma, and we became estranged. Days passed in a fog of sorrow, and I was left alone, full of regret for what I had said. A year later, on the anniversary of my granddaughter's death, I decided to visit her grave. If I go in the evening, I probably won't run into John or Amy, I thought. I bought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and, with a pail in hand, walked towards our family grave. As I approached, I saw a small child crouching in front of the grave, hands clasped in prayer. Hello there. Who might you be? I asked gently. The child turned around, and I froze in shock.
Grandma.
She exclaimed. It was Emma, the granddaughter who was supposed to be dead. She spotted me and ran over with a big smile, her face lighting up with joy. Disbelieving, I instinctively pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the warmth of her skin as my mind raced in confusion.
Grandma, are you alive?
Emma asked. Yes, of course. But you. I trailed off, trying to make sense of the situation. As she spoke, the horrifying truth came to light. I checked behind the tombstone, just to be sure, but Emma's name wasn't inscribed there. How dare they play such a cruel trick? I will never forgive them. My anger and desire for revenge began to boil over. Suddenly, I remembered the item I had been carrying with me all this time. After setting something in motion, I said goodbye to Emma at the cemetery. I will protect that smile, no matter what it takes. I vowed. 30 minutes later, I went to my son's house, the one they had supposedly moved to. I knew they were inside, but when I rang the doorbell, there was no answer. They were clearly pretending not to be home. I couldn't wait another second, so I forcefully opened the front door. John and Amy were inside, and they jumped in shock when they saw me. "Don't pretend you're not here," I shouted. John stammered.
"How did you open the front door?"
"It wasn't even locked." "Emma. Grandma's here, come out."
"What are you talking about?"
John yelled.
"We told you she's gone. She's not here."
Ignoring him, I called out Emma's name loud enough to echo through the house. Soon, I heard the pitter-patter of tiny feet, and Emma came running toward me. Moving quickly, I scooped her up in my arms, preventing my son from getting in the way. John and Amy were wide-eyed, speechless, as they watched. I fixed them with a cold stare. Emma was supposed to have passed away exactly a year ago. So why is she here? Realizing he couldn't lie his way out of this, John finally admitted that they had pretended she was dead because it was easier than dealing with my opinions on how they were raising their kids. "You two are the worst," I said, my voice seething with contempt. John shot back.
"This is your fault. We've been taking good care of Emma, but you accused us of only loving Harrison."
Amy added.
Exactly. You made these baseless accusations and it's been nothing but torture for us ever since. And now, barging into our home like this, you're the one who's out of line.
At first, they seemed cornered, but as they continued, they started attacking me with increasing aggression. But I wasn't backing down. I pulled out a photo I had taken at the grave and showed it to them. It was of Emma, in tattered clothes, emaciated, and covered in bruises. "She's wearing the same clothes right now. You couldn't even bother to give her clean ones?" I asked coldly. John tried to deflect.
"She runs around outside and tears her clothes all the time. She barely eats, and the bruises are just from falling."
I could accept scraped knees, but these bruises were in places that didn't make sense. I knew I couldn't let this slide, so I played them an audio recording. It was a conversation between them.
"Emma's a nuisance. Damn it. If you hadn't been looking out the window, none of this would have happened. It makes me sick."
The recording also captured the sounds of Emma crying as they insulted her. "As if it weren't bad enough that you were treating her so horribly, you even planned to get rid of her. I can't believe you're my own son. What you two have done is beyond cruel." John, shocked, demanded.
"How did you even record our conversation?"
The clarity of the audio had clearly taken them by surprise. I explained that I had hidden a listening device in the little pouch Emma always carried with her. I had asked Emma to leave it in the living room on purpose. A year ago, while on a trip with my friends, one of them had shared this method with me. I ordered the device online so that I could put the plan into action as soon as I returned to the US. But when I received the news of Emma's death, I put the device away in the bag I always carried and completely forgot about it. As it turned out, by a stroke of luck, I went to visit the grave on the same day my granddaughter was in the park nearby with her family. Initially, they planned to leave Emma at home and go on a picnic as a family of 3. However, just as they were getting into the car, a neighbor who had brought over a community notice said,
"Oh, heading out as a family? How nice. Is the child peeking out the window staying behind?"
Left with no other choice, they reluctantly brought Emma along. But, as usual, they only paid attention to Harrison, leaving Emma to play by herself. While exploring, Emma eventually found her way to the grave she had visited before. Being a clever girl, she remembered the place and was quietly paying her respects when I found her. John muttered,
So you met her at the grave?
"Yes, and that's when I set things in motion and started tailing you," I replied.
How dare you pull a dirty trick like that?
He shouted. "Oh. And who are you to talk, after pretending Emma was dead and telling her I was gone too?" I shot back. John and Amy had told Emma that I was dead to keep us from seeing each other. The nerve of these people. They were caught off guard, clearly not expecting that I knew so much. They stood there, at a loss for words, looking visibly uncomfortable, but then John suddenly seemed to remember something and approached me.
What about you eavesdropping on our conversations? I could sue you for that.
He threatened. "Go ahead," I replied calmly. Under American law, eavesdropping by itself isn't a crime. And I did it to protect my granddaughter, so I have nothing to worry about. Amy, who had been silent until now, moved closer to Emma. Sensing something, Emma shrank back and started trembling. Just by looking at how this child reacts to Amy, it's clear how she's been treated, I said coldly.
Stop making baseless accusations.
Amy snapped.
I'm calling the police.
Go ahead, I responded. But it's not me they'll be arresting. You're the ones who'll end up in handcuffs. I held my granddaughter tightly in my arms and glared at the two of them. They both paled immediately. I demanded to know why they had treated Emma so cruelly, and finally, John reluctantly spoke.
Girls are useless,
he said.
They just get married off and leave. But a boy can carry on the family name.
Is that really your ridiculous reason? I asked incredulously. Then what's that document on the table? John's face went blank as he tried to hide the papers, but I quickly snatched them up. Inside, I found a child insurance policy, with marks next to the payout amounts for death or severe disability. They had taken out life insurance on Emma, planning to cash in if anything happened to her.
This is just in case something happens.
John started to explain. But you had already planned to get rid of Emma before I even entered this house. I interrupted. The truth was, they had discussed their plans further. They had even said, even if we fail, we'll still get money if she's disabled. While laughing. I can't leave this girl in your care, I said firmly. I don't know what you're capable of. Amy, did you call the police? If not, I will.
Please wait, Nancy!
Amy pleaded.
Calm down.
John added.
If the police get involved, it'll only hurt Emma and Harrison. Is that what you want?
Realizing they still didn't understand, I took the hands of my grandchildren and turned to face them. Let's ask them what they want, I suggested. John and Amy reluctantly agreed. Emma spoke up first.
I don't want a mom and dad who won't even feed me. I want to stay with Grandma.
Hearing this, Both John and Amy scoffed in unison, sneering.
See? Emma isn't even cute.
Then I knelt down to Harrison's level and said, "You can say whatever you're thinking, okay?" Harrison hesitated but then said,
I don't like Mom and Dad either. They're mean to my sister.
John and Amy stood there, dumbfounded. It became clear that they had been harsh with Harrison as well, using discipline as an excuse for their cruel treatment. For their own children to reject them so completely, it was clear just how poorly they had been treated. When I reunited with my granddaughter at the cemetery, she told me about everything that had happened. Harrison, being the kind-hearted boy he is, would secretly bring bread to Emma whenever she was punished and denied food by their parents. Even though they were small, the strong bond between the siblings reassured me. Well, it's settled then. Emma, Harrison, from now on, you'll live with Grandma, I said. Their faces instantly brightened, and they nodded enthusiastically.
Wait a minute!
John protested.
What's going to happen to us?
Maybe a holding cell first, I replied. And after that, a life behind high walls, perhaps? You'll have plenty of time to reflect on your actions. As I took my two precious grandchildren by the hand and headed for the door, they repeatedly bowed their heads, begging for forgiveness. But a leopard doesn't change its spots. I knew that if given the chance, they would likely revert to their old ways. I paused and looked John and Amy directly in the eyes. You'll have to face the consequences of what you've done. Be prepared. They cried and pleaded, promising never to do it again, but I didn't believe a word. Realizing they wouldn't convince me, they turned to Emma and Harrison, desperately asking them to forgive their parents. But the children, in unison, responded,
We hate you. Don't touch us.
Their parents were left speechless. I later filed a report with the police, providing the photo and audio evidence. John and Amy were taken in for questioning and were soon incarcerated for their continuous mistreatment of my grandchildren. I formally adopted Emma and Harrison. As it turns out, it was Emma who had quietly unlocked the front door that day. After we met at the cemetery, she understood what needed to be done and acted swiftly. Thanks to her, I was able to rescue them from their parents' cruel hands. Since then, Emma's appetite has returned, and she's now at a healthy weight, running around happily every day. Harrison spends his days smiling and laughing with his sister. I've told them both that if they ever want to see their parents, they just need to say so, but they haven't shown the slightest interest. I can only wonder what kind of upbringing John and Amy had themselves. But I'm determined to keep my grandchildren smiling, no matter what. How did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.